Then, everybody, my name is Michael, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm the student groups manager at the Students' Union, so that just means that me and my team look after all things societies, so events, elections, all the kind of boring group admin stuff that we can help with. That's what we're there for. I'll start by just apologising for my voice. I know it sounds horrible. I've not been on a mad one or anything. I'm just coming out of quite a long cough. Fine, but I'm still getting back up to full strength. So if you need me to repeat anything, please just let me know, and I'll be happy to do so. So today we're going to be talking about free speech on campus. Just so you know, the session will be recorded. It'll just be the slides and voices only, so there'll be no video recording. But if for whatever reason that's a bit of an issue for you, just let me know at the end. But yeah, we'll get cracking. So in the session today, we'll be looking at recent developments in free speech at SUs. So it has been in the news quite a lot over the last couple of years. Free speech on campus is always kind of there in the background of public debate, but over the last few years in particular, it has kind of reared its head a bit more. So we'll be looking at those developments. We'll look at what existing legislation there is around freedom of speech that's relevant for you guys to think about in regards to your activity. We'll be outlining the importance of events, visiting speakers and social media in regards to freedom of speech, and we'll be discussing how we at the SU and you as student leaders can help support a healthy culture on campus. At the end, there'll be time for plenty of questions as well, so if you've got anything, please just let me know. So, free speech, what is it all about? Now, like I said, the topic of free speech comes up every so often in politics and in the news, but what does it actually mean? So, broadly, freedom of speech refers to the right to express lawful views without interference. So, within the law, essentially means it's protected unless it contravenes another law. So, for example, speech wouldn't be protected if it amounted to harassment, hate speech, discrimination, or incited hatred or a criminal act. That also includes, for example, supporting what's called a prescribed organisation, which essentially just means banned, and usually they're kind of limited to what the government defines as terrorist organisations. So, why does this matter on campus? Well, a very, very simplified explanation could go something like this. So, university is seen as a place to be exposed to new ideas. These ideas can sometimes be kind of quote-unquote controversial and can sit in conflict with each other. Students can then organise to support or oppose these differing viewpoints. This can then get attention in the media, especially concerning kind of cancel culture on campus, which I'm sure you've heard before. And then the government tries to take action to protect free speech. So that's usually kind of the background from which free speech on campus comes up. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that, but what you'll find is that it's quite cyclical. So these debates that we're having now happened in the 80s and the 90s. The government of the time will kind of attempt to do something about it, to what it sees to be the issue, and then it'll just happen all over again. So within that cycle, it's worth us just kind of looking at what the latest developments were and where we are now. So, against this background, the previous government, the previous Tory government, passed the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. The aim of this was to place new responsibility on students' unions and universities to secure freedom of speech, and that was due to come into effect on the 1st of August, so the 1st of August just gone. For the first time, students' unions were going to be regulated by the Office for Students to make sure that we were complying with these duties. So if you don't know what the Office for Students are, they're essentially the university's regulator to make sure they're doing all manner of things properly and in service of you guys as students. We aren't, as students' unions, directly regulated by the Office for Students, but for the first time we were going to be, to make sure that we were complying with all of our freedom of speech duties. And we were required to publish a load of new policies and procedures, such as a revised code of practice on freedom of speech, and that would set out how we were protecting freedom of speech for our members, visiting speakers and our staff. And if we didn't uphold our duties, students could complain to the Office for Students and we could be liable to be fined, for example, if we were found to be in breach of them. So, the new government coming in, when they were elected over the summer, has now paused that legislation. So, over the last year, when we thought it was coming in, We as the Students' Union worked really closely with the elected exec officers to respond to several consultations that were run by the Office for Students on what kind of the impact of the legislation would be and how it would work in practice. We had loads and loads of concerns about the legislation, especially when the Office for Students published guidance about how they would expect it to be enforced. Lots of the specific things they were asking for were really impractical, they were really laborious, they risked lots of negative consequences for students in terms of how they could voice their opinions on their academic education, for example, how they could complain about their lecturers or their course content, and loads of real concerns about how students could make complaints about harassment and things like that. So there was lots to really be concerned about in that legislation. And like I said, on the 26th of July, the new Labour government has paused its implementation. It's now under review, and it's likely that it could be repealed entirely. So Bridget Phillipson, the Education Minister, did say in the press release that they're considering repealing it. It's unlikely that she would say that unless there was a real good chance of it happening. So we'd expect it to be repealed, but if it's not, we'll have a look at whatever review they do, what new things they want to add in, and then we'll probably run more consultations with the exec officers and we'll respond in kind. Like with the previous consultations, our priority will be making sure that it works in the best interest for students. So we'll let you know if anything comes up, but as I said, it's probably likely that it'll be repealed entirely. But just because that legislation has been paused, it doesn't mean that freedom of speech doesn't matter and there isn't already existing legislation that matters. So there's a couple of things that's worth bearing in mind. The 1986 Education Act, Section 43, requires students' unions to protect free speech within the law, and this duty still remains in effect, regardless of the new legislation. The 1994 Education Act requires SUs to have a process for how societies can be set up and supported, and this needs to be objective. This means that as a students' union, we have to treat all student groups in an even-handed and fair way, with equal access to resources such as funding, room bookings, stalls at the society fair. All those resources we have to make sure are open to everybody equally if they're an affiliated group. It also means that we can't stop a group affiliating to the SU if their aims and objectives are legal and they don't overlap with another society that already exists. And then finally, the last bit of legislation that's worth remembering is the Equality Act. So this kind of sets out a lot of the things that would determine unlawful speech. So it prohibits discrimination, which essentially means being treated less favourably, harassment, which is creating a hostile or intimidating environment, on the basis of protected characteristics. So protected characteristics are things like age, religion or belief, sexual orientation. Speech that falls into those brackets would be classed as unlawful and so wouldn't be protected. It wouldn't be protected under these bits of legislation, and it wouldn't have been protected under the new legislation that was due to come in either. So it's clear therefore that free speech does still matter. At the SU, we recognise how important freedom of speech is for all students to voice their opinions, explore new ideas, and put forward change. This is especially important when it comes to the ability of liberation movements to challenge barriers and oppression. So we're still here to make sure that your freedom of speech can be protected. However, and this is where the bits of kind of the Equality Act come in, this doesn't mean that this should be to the detriment of the rights of other individuals or groups. And we know that balancing freedom of speech with creating an inclusive, safe space can be difficult. Free speech is a really, really tricky topic. The way the bits of the legislation interact with each other is really, really hard. Sometimes it's really difficult to make confident judgments in the moment about what's lawful speech and what's unlawful speech. Sometimes it's really clear. Other times the line is blurred, so it is a really, really tricky thing. But we're here to help support you guys through that, and we'll, take whatever steps we need to secure your freedom of speech, or protect others from the unlawful speech of others. As student leaders, your role is incredibly important in making sure that interesting debates happen on campus, but also that they can happen in a healthy and inclusive way. So we'll have a look now at how that can work in practice. So events and visiting speakers. This is one of the biggest forums in which freedom of speech is relevant on campus, and that's events and visiting speakers that are hosted by groups. So we have a legal obligation around freedom of speech to protect this process and make sure that events can happen and students can invite visiting speakers. But we also have a broader obligation to make sure that the diversity of opinions and activity can be supported on campus, regardless of kind of what the law says. So we really want to make sure that we can help that diversity flourish as much as possible. And it's important to note that despite rhetoric around cancel culture on campus, we're not in the business of shutting down debate or preventing societies from organising. In my time here, we've never had to stop an event from taking place. And there are people at the university who've worked here a lot longer than I have, will say that's been the case for even longer. So our involvement is always geared towards helping an event happen if it's safe for it to do so. So our process for reviewing visiting speakers is set out in our code of practice on freedom of speech. So you can scan that QR code there, and if you want to read it, it's online. It is just on the University of Manchester website, so you can just Google it at any time as well, and you can find it. So, like I said earlier, the new legislation required us to write a new code of practice on freedom of speech, which sets out how we secure it for our members, and that was jointly developed by us as the SU and the university. So we've got that written, but whilst the legislation's paused, it won't be published until a further review can take place. So during that time, the current code of practice is still in operation, and you can find it there. It's worth noting that the vast majority of the process set out there was exactly the same in the new code of practice as the old one. We've been doing this stuff for a long time, and the new legislation didn't really impact it too much. There were some extra things in there that we need to consider, but the basic process for inviting visiting speakers and setting up events is largely the same. So, following the procedures set out in the code of practice is the best way to ensure that your event goes ahead. The vast majority of visiting speakers can be approved without any further action taking place, but there's a few important things to consider. So, all events that involve kind of potentially controversial content or any visiting speakers should be submitted to the SU via your group dashboard as an event application, and that should take place no later than 21 days before the event. So it's the event application that really matters. You've got to make sure that that's in 21 days before the event. If you booked a room before that, it might be provisionally held for you, but it's the event application that really matters, because that's when we get all the details of the speakers. So that needs to be submitted no later than 21 days before. If you let us know after that point, we'll try our best to support the event, but we can't guarantee it'll be improved, especially if mitigation measures need to be put in place. It can take some time to get all that put together, so the best way to do it is just to follow that time frame as much as possible. That includes any events happening on or off campus, because as affiliated groups and clubs, you act as representatives of the Students' Union and the university, so regardless of whether it's on or off campus, we still need the information. Even if a speaker hasn't confirmed with you that they'll be attending, it's still easier just to submit the form with their details anyway. It's easier to remove them later than it is to add them on, so I would just stick them all on even if you're not sure. And it's worth noting that no visiting speaker can be approved without the event application being submitted, and until that event application has been approved, the event can't be advertised either. So that's why it's just worth giving yourself as much time as possible. If you want to do it before the 21 days, even better. So the sooner it's approved, the sooner you guys can start advertising your event as well. So we need to review all visiting speaker requests and events that may attract any additional attention. So we use the same process to review all requests to make sure it's fair and as unbiased as possible. And that process is based on identifying risks, essentially. So that includes things like, is there a chance it might be disrupted? Could there be threats to safety? Is there a chance of unlawful activity taking place? Now we know that the word controversial is super subjective, and I can't sit here now and say there is a cast iron process that we have for identifying what things are controversial and what's not, because it is a subjective term. The way that we do it, like I said, we use the same process for every visiting speaker to make sure that we kind of remove as much bias as possible from that. And we look for certain flags in the information we get, such as has there been disruption at events before, have the speakers had media interest. It's those sorts of things that give us a sense of whether or not we need to put any other measures in place. If we think additional measures are needed, we'll work with you and the university to put in place any additional things that may allow the event to go ahead safely. So this could include things like ticketing, guidance for whoever's chairing the event to make sure that they have a balanced Q&A, that opposing views can be held. It may be necessary for campus support and security to be there, allocate time for questions and answers, like I said, and sometimes we ask that the event be recorded just so there's like a clear documentation of what happened at the meeting, but that's really, really rare. It's only for the real controversial stuff. So expression of controversial views which don't break the law aren't reasonable grounds for withholding permission for an event. So it's much more likely that if we think it's going to be controversial, we'll ask that the time, the place, the date of the event be amended so that we can put all those things in place that we need. The only real valid reasons for refusing an event is if we think a criminal act would likely be committed, or if there would be unmanageable health and safety concerns. But beyond that, our approach is always geared to making something happen, just trying to get it happen in the safest way possible. So just quickly on social media, because this is probably one of the other biggest forum where freedom of speech matters for societies. So obviously social media is a really important tool for you guys to advertise your events, connect with your members, but it's also another environment where, like I said, freedom of speech can matter. Your posts, as kind of a base level to think about, is they can't be discriminatory against an individual, they can't be defamatory, which means unjustly causing the damage to the reputation or character of another person. They can't be libelous, which is making defamatory statements about a person in a published format, which includes social media. And they can't breach copyright, which is using another's work without their permission. And you can't include any illegal imagery, such as intimate or sexual content of others without their consent. So that's really like the bare minimum that you guys need to be thinking about, so you don't get yourselves in trouble. Sometimes, it can be harder to identify, if what you're doing is illegal. We accept that, and we don't expect you all to be experts in libel law. So if you're ever unsure about something, if you're like, "Oh, we don't know," just get in touch with us, and we can help you out. So, a couple of things to remember: that, like I said, you're publishing online at a public forum. Employers often check social media accounts, especially if you're listing your role on your society's committee on your CV. So that's just something really important to bear in mind. You don't want your potential employers getting the wrong impression, or maybe you do, I don't know, but just something worth thinking about. And also, you just think about how the content will be perceived by your audience. Really good idea to review posts, so especially from last year's committee, if you're taking over, just check that everything that's on there you're happy with. And definitely introduce a review process before posting. So, for example, having a social media officer or having somebody vet the post before it goes out. And like I said, limiting social media access to specific committee members is the best thing to do. Most of the times when we get emails from societies where they're having problems with social media, it's because loads of people have access to it and they're all posting things and nobody quite knows who's posting what, and everything gets a bit of a mess. That's especially important if you're affiliated to any external organisation. So if you're part of a political society that's affiliated to a political organisation, or a volunteering society affiliated to a charity, only you guys as the elected representatives and students who run your society should have access to your social media. You don't want some random old guy in an office in a political organisation posting things on your behalf, because you're the ones who will be held accountable for it. So just make sure you're the ones who have access. So campus culture. As I've mentioned, as an SU, we have a legal duty to support student activity in a fair way. However, we're also committed to providing a safe and inclusive space for all students and empowering you to take action on the issues that you care about. So, we understand that free speech is often used as a get-out clause for a lot of things. It's, this is free speech, so I can say what I want, yada, yada, yada. We do have a legal duty to protect things that are lawful, but we try and balance that out with giving students the opportunities to organise and take action against those viewpoints if they want to. so we can try and get as much debate going and have it happen in the safest way possible. So we have a safe space policy. If you want to have a look at it, you can scan that QR code. It's also on the SU website as well, if you just Google it. This sets out our commitment to having an inclusive and safe culture on campus. All students should be free from discrimination, harassment and hate speech. The environment that we try and engender should be built on tolerance and mutual respect, with students being protected from prejudice of all kinds. This means there are certain behavioural expectations that we have of students, and everybody is accountable for their own language and behaviour. As student leaders, you guys play a really important role in ensuring the activity on campus remains inclusive, and the activity that you guys are promoting and organising as well. The policy has loads of bits in there about how you guys as student leaders can support this. That includes things like making sure that your events are hosted in accessible spaces so that students have the chance to get involved and can exercise their own right to freedom of speech. Not becoming a front for other organisations, as I touched on before. You're here to be a group run by students, for students, and so student activity should always be your priority. Following the visiting speaker process that I outlined earlier, to make sure that we can properly review and mitigate the risk of harm to other students is really, really important. And it's also important that you guys feel confident challenging speakers or students who promote discrimination, harassment or hate speech. This should also include working with your inclusion officers that you guys should have in your societies to support any students by signposting them to the university's report and support service or the university's wellbeing services as well. Just as a quick show of hands, does everybody know what report and support is? Like, if you know, would you just put your hand up? Okay, cool. I can give you an update on what report and support is, if that would be helpful. So, report and support is the university's online platform for making reports of serious misconduct. So that's things like discrimination, hate speech, sexual misconduct. Now, we at the SU aren't qualified to investigate complaints of that nature. The clue is in the name with report and support. It's support and report. So if you make a named report, or another member of your society does, we put in touch with an advisor who's there to give you the wellbeing support, but then also launch an investigation if needed. And that investigation loops in with the university's disciplinary processes. So if it is that you guys are doing an activity and you feel, or somebody makes a disclosure to you that they've been the victim of hate speech, harassment, discrimination, then the university's report and support service is the place to go. If you guys use that service and you're not satisfied, you can speak to the SU about it, because we have a really good working relationship with them. And in particular, you can talk to your elected exec officers as well. And a bit further on, there's a link to where all their contact details are on. And because they're here to advocate for you, both to the SU and to the university. So if you're not happy with something the university's doing, your exec officers are there to speak to you and take action on it. So on the challenging, problematic behaviour, that's a really important place to signpost to for you and your members, the report and support service.
Sorry, just break it.
Yeah.
How do you spell that? Report and support?
So it's report and support.
Oh, report and support.
Yeah. So again, if you just like Google it, there's a nice like online portal that you can make reports into. Their team are the ones who are doing the responding to disclosures sessions here today. So if you or any of your group are attending that, then you'll get a lot more detail about how that process works. If not, we're hoping to get a version of that recorded and uploaded on the website as well, so you can access that. If you've got any questions about accessing those services or challenging people in your events that may be doing things that are problematic, feel free to ask me at the end, or if you're not quite comfortable doing it here, which is absolutely fine, you can drop us an email at societies.su, which will be on in a second, and we can help you out there as well. So that's a safe space policy. Sorry, there's a few QR codes here, so if you want to scan them, you can. If there's something that's happening on campus that you disagree with, we might not be able to stop that thing from happening because of the legal duty that I said earlier on. However, there are a couple of ways that you can take action, and we can support you in doing that. So we've got the campaigns toolkit there, and there are loads of resources for you to start a campaign. We also have a campaigns team whose job it is to support you guys in doing that. And they're there to help, so you can email campaigns.su@manchester.ac.uk, and they can help you out if you've got any questions. including accessing funding. So we've got a campaigns grant, which is there to give students money to do campaigns. If you're part of a society and you have questions about campaigning activities such as hosting events or running stalls, you can email societies.su, which is just listed there. And you can also start a new society using that QR code there. Both of those things are on the SU website as well, so you can check them out if you want. We're also reviewing our code of conduct. So the code of conduct is what outlines disciplinary procedures at the Students' Union. So they're a bit of like set behavioural expectations that sits alongside the safe space policy. And it just kind of sets out the different disciplinary procedures, all the different kind of stages and the sorts of things that will be included in that. Right now, that document is really like legalistic, and it's not really it's lost its relevance, we think. So we want to make the whole code of conduct and disciplinary process in the SU a lot more empowering for students, with a focus on effective mediation between different views and restorative outcomes, rather than it just be like a panel of SU staff behind a closed door making a decision. We'll be working closely with your elected exec officers on how to amend that and rewrite it, and we'll host student consultations on it as well, and on the best way to do it. So if you're interested, you don't need to commit to anything now, but you can scan that QR code and then we'll have your email, and then we can get in touch if you want to be involved in the Code of Conduct review. And that'll probably start happening towards the end of this year. Like I said, it's not committing anything now, and we'll do more comms about it close to the time, but if you want to pop your name down, you can there. And then, as I mentioned as well, you've got your exec officers. So, does everybody know like what your exec officers do, like who they are? Anybody not sure what you know?
I'm not sure.
Okay, cool. So every year there is a big campaign called Lead MCR, which is where students can nominate themselves and run to be elected as an exec officer. And there are a load of different exec officer positions. If you're a society leader, the most relevant one for you is the activities and culture officer, which is currently Charlie. If you're in a sports club, it's Megan, who's the sports exec officer, although that's run separately to the exec officer elections because sport is run under the university. And then there's a wellbeing and liberation officer, a union affairs officer, there's one for each faculty, there's a sitting community, so there's about 8 or 9 altogether. So each November, the nomination period opens, so you'll probably start hearing about it pretty soon. And the officers are there to advocate on behalf of you guys. They get elected on a manifesto, so they'll start the nomination period will open, they'll campaign, and then in February time is when all the voting happens. So in February you'll be bombarded with loads of messages about voting in it as well. The reason for that is it's important because they then set the direction for the SU. So although I'm a full-time member of staff and I'm the manager of the student groups team, Charlie is essentially my boss. Like, we're kind of the civil servants, and the exec officers are like the politicians, if you want to look at it that way. So what Charlie's priorities are, it's my job to help support, help implement, advise on, how realistic they are. But fundamentally, they're there to advocate on behalf of you and make change both at the Students' Union and at the university. The exec officers sit on like all of the real kind of like boringly titled but high-level university committees with like, Patrick Hackett and Simon Merriwest and like all like the real senior leadership at the university. They sit on those panels with, so they're plugged directly into conversations with them. So going to your exec about anything is always the best thing to do. That QR code there will take you to the webpage where all the contact details are. So it's just exec on the page. If you don't want to scan it down, you can get their details there. They are always happy to hear from you. Like, that's what they're there to do. So if you've got any concerns, questions about activity on campus, or you've got an issue, just get in touch with them and they'll be happy to help. That is everything from me. If you've got any questions later on about this, then you can just email societies.su and that just links into my team, so I'll get back to you. If you have any questions, we can go through them now, but otherwise you can just scan this QR code to register your attendance. There's a couple of questions at the end about how useful you found the session. Feel free to be as brutal as you want, but yeah, just log that you've attended, so we got a record of that. Does anybody have any questions? No. Is there anything particularly going on campus at the minute that anybody's like, oh, I'm not too sure about, or I've got questions on? Cool. Well, thank you all for coming.
Oh, can I have a question, sir?